To look at how I tackle coding, which is a little different because I do need certain efficiencies to be able to code effectively. And so the first thing that I do is I look at my study and I take each research question and I put that research question into a coding bucket. And so the research that I'm currently conducting has 4 research questions. And the first one is related to how individuals with disabilities use AI for communication. The second one is how they use it for executive functioning. The third one is how it impacts their anxiety levels. And then the next one is just how they use AI in general. I've also added 2 additional buckets into this because the goal of our research, while exploratory and qualitative, is also to make some recommendations for the future use of AI. So you'll notice I have my 4 research questions, but I've also created this additional code, which is where I'm putting anything that they've said that could be a recommendation for the future of AI. And so that's kind of an additional bucket that I filled in. And then I've also added what I call in vivo codes. And in vivo codes are phrases that are incredibly important so that when we're writing our results up, we can use the individual's words themselves to share their thoughts and feelings. So an example of this one would be this code right here, which is, I was thought of as not smart, not good enough. And that was something that I don't want to diminish the importance of that information by restating it. This one was, if I've gotten the information that I'm achieving like my peers, which was someone talking about dyslexia and utilizing audio for that. And so you'll notice that when I have my in vivo codes, and I'll just pull up the edit code here, I put in the direct quote of the individual and I'll put in a description. And so I start off with my buckets. And the reason is because I'm very curious. And if I don't have this as a metric to say if this person isn't giving me something in these buckets, I shouldn't be coding it. And because I'm so curious, I will often code all the things, even if they're not necessarily relevant to this study or what I'm trying to say, because I kind of want to put a pin in it for later. So over time, I've learned that for me, this is important to help me just distinguish between, do I really need to code this? So I'm still going to do a passive open coding, but I use this as kind of my compass so that as I'm open coding and I'm doing this pass, I'm not putting anything into it that doesn't belong. And so for the transcript that I'm coding right now, we have speaker 1, which is me, and then we have speaker 2, which is our individual that we are actively coding for. And so I don't code anything from the speaker. However, it is important to just kind of look at what the speaker is saying, simply because it's context. So understanding the context of their answer. And so as I'm reading this, obviously no problem doesn't relate, but here the individual is discussing specifically something that they find difficult to do. I struggle with verbal, I think verbal dyslexia, where I find it hard to communicate. So that one's kind of obvious because it's related to communication. And so I want to go into communication and I want to add a code here. And so what that does is, let me just show you again. So I'm going to highlight this. And I'm going to go over here. And there's a lot of different ways you can add codes in Dedoose, but this is the way that I do it, is just using buckets for the easiest thing. And so my code title would be something like verbal expression, because it's how she communicates verbally. And then she says verbal dyslexia, which from the rest of the paragraph does seem to be related to like difficulty finding words. And so I'm just putting some additional tags so that as I dig into my codes later, I don't want to miss important themes just because I'm coding everything communication and just because I'm coding things as executive functioning. I want to be as specific as possible right here so that I'm able to do this. So I've got my code title. Now my coded phrase I highlighted, so I struggle with verbal. I think verbal dyslexia is where I find it hard to communicate. And for me, I'm just going to say that here the participant identifies verbal communication as a personal challenge, so it's personally challenging for her. I don't know a ton about verbal dyslexia. I'm not the person, so I'm also phrasing that in how the person is communicating it to me. And they seem to be attributing it to dyslexia, which is an interesting thing. And again, we're exploring this, so that's really important for us to kind of capture. So I'm just trying to capture that, and then I always want to enable code weighting so that later on I can code those. So that adds 1 for communication. So then I'm going to keep reading the paragraph, and at a higher level, I think possibly because I couldn't do a lot of reading as a child, that's pretty important here. And so that one is also going to fall under, I think that's also going to fall under communication. It could possibly be something that's going to be added as a different code. You can also use colors here too, just to kind of highlight what's happening here. But I'm going to go ahead and put in my code. Let's see. I would say it's definitely related to literacy, maybe literacy history, because this is something from her childhood, so it's past tense. And she's talking about reading avoidance, but also the impact of reading avoidance on verbal communication. And that to me does shed some light on the one we just coded. And this is where I was kind of hesitant here because it does seem like there's a mixture of things going on here. So it does seem like she has some avoidance of what's going on. It does seem that there's some interesting things right here. So you'll also notice as I kind of expand these out, you can see all the codes here. They're here, and these will later be put into multiple trend buckets as I see different things happening on those trend buckets. Did I just exit that out? You can also, if you're trying to figure out your selection, you can do things like double clicking on these and being able to see it in the selection info section. Okay, so let's see. I do read a lot more just now. Also, I'm at DD, so don't always, depending on what the book is. I don't always finish it. I think that's interesting that she doesn't always finish it, because I think that speaks to starting a task and not finishing a task, the task being a book. So I think that actually relates to executive functioning. And so I'm going to go ahead and type that in as a code for executive functioning. And one of the things you do is you do read the entire transcript before you start coding this. And I know that she mentioned several times, because I read the whole thing before I started coding, that she has attention deficit disorder. So there is definitely some executive functioning impacts that I'm not 100% sure if they're dyslexia or if that they might be caused by that. And I'm not studying ADHD, but what I would hope to do is talk to other people and see if this pops up again. And if I code this, if it pops up again, I'm going to be able to find it easier. It's actually really hard to think about these and type at the same time. And so you'll see like there's a lot of codes happening here, but this is again why I like this bucket system, because if all of these were on the screen, I would kind of have my own little panic attack, because that's a lot of codes. So I like keeping them to organized buckets so that they don't stress me out and affect my own executive functioning. Okay, sorry, here we go. Sometimes I find it really hard to say exactly what I want to say, so I'll have to kind of explain it away, either with an examples or just, well, you can hear the way I'm speaking right now. So I have memos for this participant, and that's just basically my thoughts from while I was talking to this participant. And again, this is related to communication, but because I was the person that interviewed this person, she did struggle with retrieving words. And so when she couldn't think of the word, she would just describe what she meant. And so that kind of speaks to like expressive communication was kind of her mode, and it's definitely a compensation strategy because it's something that she's done simply because she doesn't know how to retrieve that word from that location in her brain. So she does actively do a lot of describing things. So here I'm going to emphasize that the participant compensates for word retrieval. So meaning, pulling that word out of the location in the brain. And I think this is important to our study because, again, we're looking at the impact of AI on communication. And a lot of times AI can take those descriptions and give the correct word, and we're going to kind of see that later in this transcript. And it can help her find that word so that she's using it in written communication. And she does detail that a little bit later on, how she works with that. So I'm definitely wanting to code this, but I'm also kind of taking a mental note to myself that I'm definitely going to want to circle back to that. And then for an in vivo code, I was really struck by the statement that she's made where she said, well, you can hear how I speak. For me, and as a researcher and as a human, I was really struck by that statement because she's already anticipating that we are judging her for her communication skills. That's just a given. She's never met me. We haven't talked for any length of time. I have not given away. This is literally in the opening part of the interview. So for me, that's an in vivo code because it really struck me when she said that. That it was like, wow, there is some really deep-seated anxiety and deep-seated trauma within this. And so when I'm doing an in vivo code, I just put the title as the full code. And then I put in the description, kind of what I'm thinking of why it's important. She's candid, she's self-aware. And I feel like there's a level of vulnerability when she said that because she's definitely disclosing an insecurity to me. And so I've now coded that passage. So this is more about the procedural act of coding and less about the entire hand coating, there is another video where you can see definitely we're going to dig deeper into this. So this is the first video that I would say for you to watch. And then the next video, I will continue digging deeper into how I'm doing these coats. But this one really just says, you know, how am I setting up my coating?